Okay, so for those of you who aren't Catholic, a couple vocabulary things. Lay means someone who's not ordained and is not a woman or a man who's religious in a religious order of any kind. And a diocese is a main area of the church that we use to kind of organize everything. So my name, to begin, is Jenna Meyers. I am an economics major with a Catholic Studies minor. I am presenting on my research project, Does It Pay to Work for the Catholic Church? Which I am presenting my year-long research project with the Hank Center as a junior research fellow. So this is how I'm going to go through today. I'm going to be a little fast, and so I might not have a lot of time for questions, so come find me after. We're going to go through some background information, the goal of my research project, and then how I address that goal, trends I found, and implications for the Catholic Church in the future. So, some background. As you can see, I have there the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, CARA, estimates that parishes in the United States are adding 650 lay ministers to their staffs every year. At the same time, the number of active clergy is aging and not being replaced as rapidly as in the past. As fewer people enter seminaries and religious orders, the positions that were traditionally filled with ordained ministers are now filled by professionally trained lay people who deserve compensation, of course, from the parish in accord with their professional and educational credentials. In particular, as these positions that were traditionally filled by priests or women and men religious are filled with lay men and women, there is an increased financial strain on these parishes and dioceses as they have to come up with extra money to bridge the gap of really paying for these people who are coming in to be leaders in the church. So, in addressing a very small piece of this, because this is a huge issue, I wanted to look at what ways it pays to work for the Catholic Church. If not always monetarily, of course monetarily, but also in what other ways. And in general, what keeps lay church employees coming back to work for the Catholic Church. And using my economic background and experience, I wanted to study the economic trends that impact lay church employee satisfaction. What keeps people working for the Catholic Church? So the easiest way to do that, I found, was to do a case study between the Diocese of Belleville and the Archdiocese of Chicago, both dioceses in Illinois. I wanted to look at these two places in particular because the Diocese of Belleville is traditionally poor, whereas Chicago is very affluent. The cost of living in Belleville is 16% below the U.S. average. In Chicago, our cost of living is 4% above the U.S. average. Per capita income in Belleville is $25,000 annually versus Chicago's $40,000 annually. Just a little bit of background information to show that the economic realities of these locations are very different. And examining these trends across the United States, what would I find about how economic realities impacted Belleville and Chicago that would mean more for the church in general across the United States? So, in order to do that, I was able to solicit information about lay church employee experience in the United States by taking a survey. I asked a bunch of background questions like diocese, role, age, education level, salary, stuff like that, and then qualitative questions about what satisfies these men and women who work for the church. How satisfied are they by their health insurance, by their salary, by their spiritual and vocational fulfillment of their job, and by the ability to serve others. In all, I was able to collect 271 survey respondents who responded to my survey across 84 dioceses. Of course, it was concentrated in Belleville and Chicago because of the case study, but in general, across 84 dioceses. And due to the relatively small sample size of this paper, I don't want to show compelling statistical proof for a certain issue. I rather want to show broad trends and demonstrate how economic realities impact how lay ministers feel about their jobs. So, in doing that, I'm looking at the fact that the economic realities of Belleville and Chicago are obviously different. And I found that it is evident that these economic situations are different in how lay ministers feel about their salary, benefits, spiritual and vocational fulfillment, serving others, and flexibility in their jobs. So jumping into these trends where I saw differences between Belleville and Chicago and a broader trend in the United States in general, I want to look at this. There's a lot of information up here, but I want to draw your eye to, it's difficult to find a well-paying job. This is the Archdiocese of Chicago respondents and Belleville respondents. And in general, you can see that everyone agrees. It's hard to find a well-paying job in general. A little bit higher in Chicago, but there's that. Then looking at salary, this was the salary satisfaction that I found in my respondents. Only 38% of Chicago respondents were satisfied, versus 60% were satisfied in Belleville. Sorry, how much time do I have? Oh, okay, cool. It's fine. So then, looking at this salary, I want to focus on this point then, was the fact that the Diocese of Chicago was much lower. And why was this? Because of the cost of living. So cost of living is a huge factor on this. And in comparison, at least because of its high cost of living, a Catholic school teacher who previously worked at a huge parish in the Gold Coast area of Chicago said, I couldn't have lived within a 20-minute walk, let alone a 10-minute drive from her parish. Cost of living is a huge issue here. She couldn't have afforded to work very close to her parish in Chicago. I have so much more information on benefits, but I think the important thing to note is that across the board, health insurance is a huge factor in why lay ministers like their jobs, and it's a big friction point for poor dioceses like the Diocese of Belleville. Spiritual and vocational fulfillment is another huge thing, and definitely important to people in the Diocese of Chicago and Belleville and across the board, but I think in particular I wanted to look at the difference in wealth of opportunity, and I found in Chicago that there was a huge wealth of opportunity, not in Belleville, and that accounted for this difference in 71% of lay ministers reported they were spiritually fulfilled versus the 55% in Belleville. I want to finish with looking at these two trends, which were also reflected in my data across the board in the United States in general. There's so much information here in this paper that I could tell you more about later, but in general, flexibility was a huge factor, and the ability to work close to home or work flexible hours and have a flexible schedule. And in general, I want to end with implications, right? So as this demographic shift continues, and more jobs that were filled by priests in the past are filled by lay church, lay men and women, there's an increased financial pressure. And it's important to think about the fact that we have to address those issues, but at the same time, there's a lot of hope there, because 80% of my survey respondents said, I view my employment with the parish or diocese more as a vocation than a job. And that's why it's so important to address the financial pressure that exists here. There's learning outcomes, there's so much unfinished business. Wow, I uncovered a rock and there's tons of them. And thank you.
How did you recruit your participants?
Yeah.
I think it's a sizable number for...
It's statistically significant.
Yeah. So I appreciate you doing the trends, but how did the recruitment process
No,
work?
absolutely. And that was going to be something I could have talked about, but couldn't. But basically, I reached out to people I know, and I worked at Catholic Extension, which is an organization a while back, and they had a distribution list I was able to use. And from there, it was crazy how it spread. I actually got connected. Yeah, I got connected with someone who put it in an e-blast of theirs, and then everyone filled it out. It was really cool.
What was the initial sample size you're hoping for? I know you had 271 respondents, but I was just curious what the original sample size is supposed to be.
Totally. I mean, I was going for as many as possible, but I wanted at least 100. And I had 112 until this really awesome woman put my link in her survey, and then a ton of people filled it out.
To speak on the implications there, you said you surveyed a background on salary or education level.
Yeah.
Do the trends say that people prepare themselves, they attended higher ed, or they specialize in the field to work for the church, or was it the case that someone who had a background in accounting said, it's not a bad option to choose work for the church?
Yeah. So, oh gosh, there's so much there. So many people in their survey response said, I used to work for a nonprofit and I wasn't happy and I came to work here. Or I worked for the corporate world and I wasn't happy and I came here. And so that was one side of it, but another side was I knew when I was getting this high level of education that I wasn't going to be paid the average amount that most people who have this education are paid. So it's very like the two different groups.
I'm just wondering if your survey questions asked him about educational debt.
Debt, it didn't.
Okay.
Again, that was one of my learning objectives was how to write a survey. Learned a lot there. Yeah.
In the qualitative part of the survey, was there any area that people felt moved to write the negative parts about working for the Catholic Church? Like,
Absolutely.
what did you find there? Like,
Yeah.
what were the most negative things about working for the Catholic
So,
Church?
yeah, one of the questions I asked was to rank how strongly you feel about a statement. And one of the statements I said was that there are many disadvantages to working for the Catholic Church. And I was surprised because I wasn't surprised, but it was very like 50-50. Like some people marked like very high levels. Some people marked like that they didn't agree with that statement at all. But in general, everyone was right in the 3 level. They marked it in the 1 to 5 range, and people just marked 3. But to that point, there were many people who said, I'm frustrated with my salary level. I'm frustrated by the fact that I don't think my church could pay me more if they tried. And there definitely was like significant like commentary on the fact that everyone wants to be paid more, especially in areas which I could go into more detail on, where the cost of living is really high. In Belleville, a dollar stretches a lot farther than in Chicago.
Can I ask one more data set
Yeah.
question? Did you just talk to people or just survey people working in parishes, or did you like campus ministries, hospital chaplaincies, any of those things?
I did diocese and parish.
Do you want to show any data like which you think is relevant for everyone to see? Like something which is the main chunk of your presentation which cannot be missed out?
I think we covered in salary.
Okay, I have a question that you basically talked about people working for the church. What about the other religions which are like prevailing in the US? How do you think your research would implement in that area as well?
Totally, yeah. So this is obviously very Catholic Church centered, but I think the Catholic Church is probably encountering issues that are very similar for other parishes or other religious institutions, and I think looking at not only like the statistics and the economic value of how people are paid, and so are they paid appropriately for their cost of living? I didn't get to share this, but a campus minister who I talked to offhand in the Bay Area said that she's paid super competitively she works at Santa Clara, a Jesuit university, very competitively for her industry, but it's not good enough for the cost of living of the Bay Area. It's just not enough. And I think that's probably something that a lot of people in all different religious institutions have to deal with.
Do you think this project would set a base for the economic outcomes for other religions as well?
I think it would have to be tailored differently. I think the Catholic Church is so specific to some degree, and some of this research is so targeted at like things I know from my knowledge working in the church, that it'd have to be tailored differently.
Any other questions?